Okay, so we're being recorded, and welcome to anybody who's watching this as a recording as well. Just to start off with, one of the things that's important to look at are what we call the module learning outcomes, and those are the things that, according to the definition of the module, that you've got to achieve. And although they look very similar for both Anglia and Wales students, there are some differences. So if, for example, we look at these are the Wales ones, and you'll see that what it does is it sets out under a series of headings the things that you've got to demonstrate that you've done. And alongside that, you then get a number, which is the grade. So research questions and objectives, 15%. And we will then mark that 15%. So it doesn't matter whether you write, 1,000 words or 2,000 words on this, the most you're ever going to get is 15%. So I think one of the things that is important to look at is to look at that breakdown of marks and to try and allocate marks to word count. I think that's an important thing to do. So you'll see that there is something about research questions and objectives. We then ask you to say something about the literature review, then to go into your methodology. There's a section at the end on reflections, which I'll mention briefly shortly, and then we have a number of marks that we give for structure, grammar, writing style, referencing, and so on. So important that you actually do follow that marking scheme. If you're an Anglia student, this is the marking scheme and the learning outcomes that relate to your module, and you'll see it superficially it looks the same. We start out with research questions and objectives. We have a literature review and a methodology, but in fact what happens is that for Anglia students the grades on those are high. So you can see that literature review is 30% there. And for Wales it's 25, and also as well the methodology bit is a bit smaller. The major difference is that there is no section on reflections, which is a critical part of the Wales one. So the Anglia Ruskin work is very similar structurally, but it does miss one particular section or one particular chapter. And the reason for that is a difference in word counts, which we'll talk about shortly. But essentially, it doesn't matter whether you're an Anglia or a Wales student, and this applies as well. I know we're starting to get students now who are not MBA students who are coming through on some of the other master's degrees. So it doesn't particularly matter if you're on a master's degree, you'll be an Anglia student. So this is what you've got to look at and what you've got to follow. So just looking at each of those sections in turn, I think what we're looking at really here are ways of making sure A, that you pass, and B, that you're saying the right things to get higher marks. I think that's a critical thing for you if you're going to put the effort in. The first thing we want is an explanation of the problem, and you can see that's worth 15% or so, and so you can also see as well it ought not to be a massively long section, and one of the things that we do get quite frequently are people who write almost half the assignment explaining the problem, and you can understand why, because if it's about your organisation, it's something that you know a lot about. You know lots of context about it. You know, hopefully you're enthused by it, and so what we get are people who just write an awful lot about their organisation or their country or whatever it happens to be. You've actually only got about 400 words to write this, so that this whole assignment is an exercise in very, very tight writing. And I think that's an important thing. You've got to keep things succinct and very clear, and also you've got to be ruthless. So if you do end up realising that you've written your introduction's too long, there are two options. One is that you leave it and you reduce the word count for other sections, or the other is that you start to cut the introduction. Most people, in fact, start to reduce the word count elsewhere, which is a really bad mistake. One of the things about this module is that after you've passed, you will go on to the dissertation. And so what we find is that my screen went blank. What we find is that even if you write something that you have to cut out of this, the chances are you can use it in your dissertation. So nothing gets wasted really in this particular module. So don't feel too bad about having to cut things out. So the problem, what we want is we need you to make it interesting. Tell us why you're interested in doing it. So if what you're looking at is, I don't know, motivation of bank employees, don't just tell us that. Why are you doing it? Why is it a problem? Do you work in the bank and you're noticing that people aren't putting full effort in? What is it that's piqued your interest? Why do you want to do it? And then try and justify it. So why is what you are doing of value? It's much easier if you're doing it for a particular organisation. So if you've identified a work problem, that's much easier to do because you can clearly say, we've got this problem in the office. If I can solve it, it will do all these things. And that's fine. If you're doing something more general, then that's more difficult. But why is it of value? Who will be able to pick up your work and say, or and by work I mean your final ultimate dissertation, and actually get something out of it? So who will it be of value to? What should they be able to do once you've done the work? Give us some data to justify it. So if you're talking about absenteeism, don't just say people don't attend work. How do you know it's a problem? Can you benchmark it against previous work? Can you benchmark it against other organisations in your sector? Why is it a problem? Now, what we also want are very clear objectives, and we talked about objectives in the first session. So if you missed that, you may need to go back to that. But 3-4 clear, succinct objectives which describe what you're doing, what you want to find out, and what you are seeking to achieve. And what we're looking for is that there must be an outcome. So, what is it that somebody will get out of your dissertation? So if you're looking, for example, at absenteeism in the workplace, there must be objectives that say, and I will make recommendations as to how we can improve attendance at work, or something like that. It's really important. If that's missing, then you've lost 2 or 3 marks just by that simple sentence. The other thing that needs to be done is to consider whether you should have a hypothesis. We actually had a conversation at an exam board this week where one of our externals commented that many of our students don't get this bit right. Essentially, a hypothesis is where you are trying to establish some kind of link, something that you can evidence. So, a hypothesis that says that people, if I wanted to put a piece of work together, and I'll take this example from the first session, that says something like, students who attend the online sessions in research methods have a higher chance of passing. That is a hypothesis, because what I'm saying is, if somebody does something, then there will be a consequence. And I can prove that, or I can disprove it. I may not be able to prove it, but I could construct an experiment that looked at the students who attended the sessions, the students who didn't attend the sessions, and look at their pass rates. And if I found a tangible difference, then I've actually proved my argument. Now, it could equally be that I can't find any tangible, I can't find any difference, in which case my argument doesn't hold. But that doesn't matter. The point is, I am making an argument. If, on the other hand, I didn't know why people passed or failed research methods and simply wanted to explore some of the issues, I wouldn't need a hypothesis, because I'm not trying to prove something. So essentially, if what you are doing is trying to link two variables, for example, like motivation and organizational performance, then there must be a hypothesis. And it's important that you get that bit right, because if you use a hypothesis where there shouldn't be one, then you will lose marks. And if there should be a hypothesis and you don't give us one, then again, you will lose some marks. So do have a look at that section on hypothesis. Okay, then the lit review, and Michael did some work on the lit review, and again in session 1 I did a little bit of work looking on how you search for this. When we talk about a literature review, what we actually mean is the theory. So this is the underpinning theory. I'll come back to you, Olafunke. This is the underlying theory. So if you are looking at something simple like motivation, there's lots and lots of literature on motivation. And that's what we expect. We would expect to see a discussion of the key underlying theoretical academic principles governing your area. What we also expect you to see, are that you have used journals. If you bring something that is entirely textbook based, you will get a very, very low mark. We expect to see journal articles referenced. We expect to see them referenced properly with Harvard referencing, because again, there are marks available for that. And what we then want you to do is we want you to talk to us about the literature. Don't just say, writer X says this, writer Y says this, writer Z says this. What we need you to do is to look at the theories. How have the theories developed? How does one writer disagree with another writer? How does one writer build on the work of a third? So we expect to see all those things in the literature review. And that again is quite an important thing. So we're very conscious. This is not an easy module. We ask you to do an awful lot in a very, very short span of words. But essentially, what you've got to do is to do, first of all, to show us that you know what the underpinning theory is. First of all, that's the first thing. Secondly, you've got to show us that you can identify the key principles. And then thirdly, you've got to show us that you can actually use journals and you can write properly. So that's an awful lot. And you're looking to do that in something like 12, 13, 1400 words. It's a big ask. We're aware of that, and we do take that into account. But that's the task that you've got in this. Now, one of the things that I suggest that people do is at the very end of the section, just very briefly summarize what you believe are the key issues. So coming out of the research, what do you believe are the key issues that you need to be looking at in your research? And I'll come back to that point in a minute. Right, okay, so let me just deal with a couple of questions. Irene, do we have to reference our source of information about the company? Yes, please. Yes, you do. So if what you're saying is, again, let me take a simple example like absenteeism. You may be able to get hold of the HR data that shows what the numbers are. If, on the other hand, what you're saying is, I don't have any numbers, but from my personal observations, then the best that you can do is to say it's from your personal observations. But we do need to know what the issue is for you. And then somebody asked about how do we relate hypothesis to your topic. Well, I think I've tried to explain that. Essentially, if what your topic is about is linking two different things together or trying to prove something, then you need a hypothesis. It doesn't matter what the topic is. If you aren't trying to do that, you're doing something more exploratory, then you don't. And so it's not about linking it to the topic, it's about whether or not what you want to do demands a hypothesis or not. If you have a specific question, and if you're send it to Michael, if you're an Anglia student, just say, oh, this is what I want to do. Should I be having a hypothesis? And we'll tell you. We won't tell you what it is, but we'll tell you whether you should have one or not. And these are just a couple of things really about the online resources. We have talked about databases. We expect you to get into them, either our own EBSCO one or the university one. And you know, every time a student's come to me and said, I can't find information about something, within 5 minutes I've been able to find them 50 journals. So there is absolutely no excuse for not finding relevant material. And if all we get back are standard textbook things, you will get a very, very low grade in this. Think about making sure that what you're doing relates to you. And again, a lot of the kind of key literature is very Western based. It's US or UK that you pick up. But if you're in Nigeria or the Gulf, why should that apply to you? So you should be looking at things that relate to the West African situation, or the Gulf region. Again, if you're in the oil industry, look for things that relate to the oil industry, and that's important. That's what we expect to see. And also as well, try and focus it on your idea. And again, if you're looking at something about, for example, project management communication. We need it about project management communication. We're not interested in project management techniques. So if that's what you are doing, make sure that what you do is focused on that. And if it's not, again, you will not do particularly well in this, because we'll go into this having looked at your objectives, expecting to see something about project management communication, and suddenly we start to find something about basic approaches to running a project, which just doesn't work. So keep it focused. It's about that. Right, perfect. Okay, now then, the methodology section is the biggest piece of marks. It's sort of 45% in total for Anglia students, a bit less for Wales, but the methodology is critical. This well, right, sorry, let me just deal with that. In that case, Noza, then you've got problems. There's public information. One of the things that you will need to do when you're doing the dissertation is you will need to get permission off the company to do the work. So if you are doing something that is company based and you need company information and company support, and they will not give you that information, then you will not be able to do the dissertation. So you might need to at the end of this process, I'm not suggesting you change at this late stage the proposal, but unless we get a letter from the bank in your example saying that they support you and they will give you access to data, we will not allow you to do the dissertation. We would not be able to do that. So you may well need to find that actually at the dissertation stage you've got to come up with another project topic. At this stage, it doesn't particularly matter, because we don't need you to produce any evidence that your company will support you. Although it's nice if you can tell us that they will do. But for the dissertation, we certainly would. Excuse me. Okay, so methodology. Some of the things that we ask you to do, again, this is a very tightly constrained module. So, what do you have to do for the methodology section? Sorry, I'm on battery power, and every time I stop, it switches itself off, and then when I switch it back on again. Right, apologies. I'll move the cursor around to try and keep it active. So, where does this start? First of all, you've got to tell us that you understand basic principles of research methodology. So what do you think are the key issues in methodology? And there are a number of ologies, there are a number of different approaches. So what we expect to see is some sort of introduction to research methodology to say, what is it about? What is research methodology? What are the different approaches? So that's the first thing. The second thing we need to say is, what type of approach are you going to take? So think about this as a kind of inverted triangle with the point at the bottom. So you start off at the top, very broad and general. So what is in methodology, which are discussed. You then move down the triangle, which is getting narrower now, and you say, this is the approach that I want to take. And at each stage, you justify this. So why am I doing this? Okay, so I am now taking this approach. What are my options? And again, a brief discussion of the options, and then which option am I taking and why? And then you then go into more detail about the one bit. So it's impossible to do justice to the whole of research methods in the time that you've got. It's not even worth attempting. So what you've got to do is you've got to start off with some broad general principles and work down and down and down until you get to the thing that you want to do. So for example, if what you want to do in the end is a questionnaire, we would expect to see a quite detailed section about the questionnaire, not just talking about what the issues are in questionnaires, but how you would do it. What would your sample be? How would you get at the sample? What is the sampling technique? We'd expect to see those sorts of issues discussed. If you're going to use a questionnaire, there is no point discussing focus groups or interviews because you aren't doing them. So what we expect to see is some broad principles at the top, and then as you work your way down, you refine it more and more, and each stage you select it. So for example, you might want to say, do I do a qualitative or quantitative? Okay, I am going to do qualitative. So what are the options? I could use a focus group, I could use interviews. What am I going to, or observations, what am I going to do? We don't need to know more than a couple of lines on each of those things, and you would then say, I am going to use interviews because, and you tell us why, and then you tell us about the interviews that you are going to conduct. How many do you intend to do? What types of people do you want to interview? We don't need to know the detailed questions, but we just need to know that you understand how to do it. And also that you're sensible about it. We sometimes get people who say they're going to do 80 interviews, which is just crazy. You want 8 dozen tops. You're not going to do huge numbers of them. So how is it going to be done? What sort of cross-section of people are you do? And then the thing that we say every single time and that nobody does, and by nobody I mean 95% of people don't do, is they don't then link it to the literature, because what you should be doing is saying, the purpose of my interview. So what we want to know is not just that you're going to do interviews, but what is the point of them? What are you trying to find? So going back to my example about project management communication, if at the end of project management communication lit review, you've summarized the key issues, those key issues should be the things that you are asking questions about. So what you could say is, In my interviews, I will be trying to identify or trying to find out the following things. And those should be things that are coming out of the literature. And that's the thing that, personally, when I'm marking, I look for. And I am constantly disappointed, even though every single time we tell people to do it. So what you've got to do is you've got to link these things together. The methodology ought to link to the literature review. So it's no good having a methodology that says, I'm going to use questionnaires, and then you have questionnaires that don't relate to the literature. And we see that all the time in dissertations, and it's really important that the bits link together. So what you need to be able to do is to show that you understand what you want to do. So if for example, at the end of your literature review, you end up saying about how important it is for the whole organisation to be involved in issues of communication, we would expect something that relates to the whole organisation. So if you come up with a methodology that just talks to a very small section of it, it doesn't seem to work for us. So you've got to make sure that all the bits fit together. That what you are doing is that the methodology fits in with the literature, and that you tell us really clearly what it is that you're seeking to do. And there are very simple marks that go begging because of that. Don't know what's happened there. So this is just for Wales students. For Wales students, there is a final section which talks about reflections on learning, and essentially what we expect you to do is to say something about reflective practice. So this is about how equipped you are to do the dissertation. What skills have you got? What's your learning style? What's your operating style? And we also need you to look at some sort of reflective practice. And there are a couple there. There is a link in the FAQs. It's covered in the content. And also for Wales students as well, in this section, we expect you to say something about ethics. And I'll say something more about ethics in a minute. Excuse me. We also require Wales students to include in the body of their work an action plan. So that's a plan that says, this is for the dissertation. So how long do you intend to take to do it? What are the milestones? And you can do it as a Gantt chart, you can do it as a table, you can do it as a spreadsheet. We don't mind what, but what we want to do is to see that you understand how long this will take and that you've got a sensible plan. So that's the issue. So that's for Wales students. And for Wales students, the word limit is 4,000. For Anglia, the word limit is 3,000, so it's much tighter, and there's nothing we can do about that. That's the university rule. So for Anglia students, there is no reflection section. We don't ask you to think about that. We do ask you to do a plan, but to append it, and that doesn't come within the word limit. It comes within the word limit for Wales students. So there's no reflection section, and the plan is appended. So in terms of the words that you've got to do the other substantive sections, it's pretty much the same for both groups of students. Nobody is penalised or nobody benefits. And we expect some reference to ethics in the methodology section. We do look at the word count. If you go over the word count, then you will be penalised. The 100 or so we don't get too excited about, but if you go significantly above that, then there is a penalty. So let me just say something about ethics for a minute. Again, when you go into the dissertation stage, you will have to fill an ethics form in. And so what we're looking at are there any sort of ethical concerns that we've got about how the work is being done. Now, there are some obvious things. So, for example, when you're doing a questionnaire or interviews, you might ensure confidentiality of the names, confidentiality of data. Those sorts of things are fairly obvious and fairly standard. Typically, in management type projects, that there aren't major ethical concerns. You know, if you're doing something in psychology and sticking pins in animals, or you're working in a health setting or a setting with young children, then there are major ethical concerns, and you've got to make sure all sorts of safeguards are in place. But for most of the work that people will do, that there aren't any major problems. I think probably the biggest problem that you get in an ethical sense is if you're a manager and you are doing a survey of your subordinates, and you know the possibilities that they will give you the answers that they think that you will want. So how do you know people are honest with you? And as I say, I think we find probably quite often where it's people who are, you know, possibly quite senior people who are asking questions of their subordinates, it does become a bit more difficult. So you've got to look at how will you ensure that people give you open and honest answers. And probably for most of you, that will be the biggest ethical challenge. There may be odd ones of you who work, say, in a healthcare setting, and certainly in the UK, if you're working in a hospital, there may well be a need to get ethical approval from the hospital. Likewise, if you work, say, for a university, you might need to get ethical approval for them as well. But we can have that conversation with you later on. But for now, what we need to know is that you've looked at it and you have considered whether there are any concerns about things like confidentiality, about the honesty of responses, and I think those are the key issues, really. If you're getting data from a website, then there is no ethical issue there if it's in the public domain. So this only relates really to information that you're going to get. It might also relate to published to existing information within your organisation. I mean, for example, if you were doing, I don't know, let's say you were doing a piece of work that involved a review of wages. The data on wages that people earned would be highly confidential, I'd have thought, in most organisations. So if you were going to be able to access that, you would need to explain how that was going to be safeguarded, how you would make sure that nobody else saw it, and so on. If though it's publicly available data, then there are no issues there at all. But we do expect you to actually generate your own data. We expect to see some primary research in this. So if you come up with something that actually is only ever going to use publicly available data, at the dissertation stage, you are not typically looking at a high-scoring dissertation. We would expect to see some data that you generated yourself. And then finally, to say something about the marking, Michael and I split this 50-50, so it's completely arbitrary whether I mark it or he does. Somebody in the office just divides students in half, and essentially we mark, I think we mark 8 scripts each, then we swap them over, so we do a calibration, and then there's a third person who does a final check. So that's essentially the marking process. I don't know what the ethical issues are with the government office. It's exactly the same as anything else, I guess. If it's government published data, you haven't got a problem. If you are getting confidential data from a government office, it's exactly the same, I'd have thought, as any commercial organisation. Perhaps more so. And there are also, in the UK, there are data protection issues that you may need to take account of. So it's very difficult to answer questions without knowing the context. All that we're asking at this stage is that you you give a full consideration about whether there are any potential issues. All we need you to do is recognise them at this stage. At the dissertation stage, we would go into more detail, and there is a form that you've got to complete that looks at whether or not there are any potential problems, and if there are, we would send it on to a sort of group, an expert group to have a look at and to give you advice. So, okay, so essentially this is, I mean, how not to fail. I mean, people who do all this, I'm not saying are guaranteed to pass, but pretty much, there's a 99% pass rate. There is an option to send a draft in for feedback. It must be in the week before the submission date. The dates are on. I think I might mention the date in a minute. And we will give you draft on the feedback. We won't give you, it will not be detailed. We don't go through and correct your grammar. Essentially what we do is we would tell you what we think are the key things that you've missed. So we're not allowed to grade it. We don't give you a mark. And under the university rules, they actually, if you're actually at the university, they probably wouldn't do this for you. But we will do this. So you can send a draft in, and we will tell you what areas we think you need to be focusing on. So we try and pick up the kind of negatives on it and tell you what you need to be looking at. Do justify the idea. Don't just say, I want to do something on project management communication, and just leave that hanging. Why? Why do you want to do it? What is the issue that you've identified? What are you trying to do? So explain, tell us what you want to do. Use journals. You absolutely must use the appropriate academic journals. If you don't do that, you will get a very low grade for this. So if all we get is sort of basic textbook stuff thrown back at us, then you are looking at a bare pass at best. So it's really important that you use that. Yes, by draft we mean the complete work. Yes, we will only look at the complete work. We won't do it in sections. You must send in the complete work. Just say as well, we only do it once. This is all explained elsewhere, but we only do it once. And our preference is that you send us the full work. If you just send us a bit, then you've wasted your chance. You just get one go at this. So, once you've got a draft, send it in. If you haven't got a full draft by the deadline date, just send in what you've got. But the option's there. Do explain what your own research method is. So don't just write about questionnaires and interviews and case studies and focus groups. We know all that. What are you going to do? How are you going to do your research? And if you aren't using focus groups, there is no point telling us about them. So we need to know how you are going to do the research, and we want an explanation of that. Try and link the research to the theory. That's that point I made, the bits in red. Try and link that research to the theory, and also make sure that you look at you do everything. Use that marking scheme as a guide. Cover everything that's in that marking scheme. We do get people who just miss out complete sections, and you score 0 for it. So it's really important that you do that. Monday 11th of January, we must have the work in by Monday the 11th of January. Anything that arrives after that is not looked at, and there are absolutely no exceptions. We cannot listen to any sob stories, special appeals, anything. That is the absolute date. So, if you're not able to send in the full draft, then just send in what you've got. But we will not look at anything that is date stamped after the 11th of January. And the figures are there. For those people who get feedback on a draft, the pass rate is 95%. And for those people who don't, the fail rate is 75%. And those are extremely unfortunate statistics, but the feedback on the draft is important, and obviously as well, the people who send a draft in are those who've worked in a timely way. So it's not just about the draft. So there we are. The question about age of, okay, I've finished now. So the question about age of journals is quite a good one. And one of the things that we do get sometimes are dissertations where the references are actually very old. You get lots of references starting 19 as opposed to 20. And I do think sometimes, particularly places maybe in sort of Africa maybe, where people have got a link to a university library that's not particularly good, and they've gone into the library and they've done some work and they've actually dug out some quite old material, and I don't think that's particularly helpful. There are some journals which are really kind of seminal ones. So if you're starting to talk about some of the key issues, for example, maybe in motivation, you might need to go back to the 1950s to some of the basic stuff. But what we would expect you to do is to look at things that are more recent. So yes, the more recent the stuff is, then I think typically the more that we would be impressed by it. That doesn't mean to say that old journals are not of value. But let's give an example. Let's say you're looking at something to do with with a dissertation that's somehow looking at issues to do with the web. There's really no point in going back more than a decade. If you start giving us content that's looking at web-based commerce that's more than probably 5 or 6 years old, then it's out of date, because you're looking at something that's changing really significantly. Whereas there might be other areas where the theory is perhaps a bit more settled, and the theories are not particularly developing, although they're being applied in different contexts. So I think you need to look at the kind of area that you're in, and if what you're looking at is a really fast-moving area, and anything really to do with kind of web-based commerce, I would suggest falls into that category, then really anything more than about 5 years old is probably a waste of time. The other thing to mention too is that a journal that was published 5 years ago, the article was probably written 8 years ago based on data that was 10 years old. So the academic writing process is actually quite slow. The time between an academic starting to write a journal article and it actually appearing in print could easily be 3 years, possibly even 5. So when you start to look at these things, people are using data that was old when it was published. So you just need to bear that in mind as well. In some areas, you may find, say it's not moving quite as fast. So I think it's just something you have to be sensible about. But it's a good question. Okay, any more questions? Excuse me, have a drink. Okay, if you want the PowerPoint from this, you can download it. It's the one, it says Files 3 at the top, just to the right of my picture, and it's the one that says RM4 Jan 16. And if you missed the first session, you can also download that as well. So you can if you just click on those, you can download them. No, absolutely not. We don't want a sample of the questionnaire. We want to know what it is that you're trying to find out, but you can just describe that in a short paragraph or a few sentences. We don't want to sample the questionnaire. Absolutely, positively not. No. Yeah, in terms of a questionnaire, we're much more interested in who are you going to sample, how are you going to do it. So this is more about the mechanics of it, but we do need to know what you're seeking to find. So again, if what you're looking at is project management communication, and you're going to use a questionnaire. What is the point of your questionnaire? What is it that you are trying to do? And again, all we want are a few sentences or a short paragraph about what is the point of your questionnaire and how it will fit into your research. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'll finish now. So let me just switch off the recording.